What's up, guys? Welcome to my channel. Now we are about to do how to be a dad. Now I'm gonna let them do all of the stuff. Let's start.
Thank you. As you guys clearly see, there's been, I won't say a hostile, a very good takeover on the channel. I'm a deputy now, I'm not the main person in charge. So, welcome to another episode. We're going to be talking, I think, a very important topic as relates to Black masculinity. Let me introduce my guest, Erick Kabongo, psychologist and researcher. And the reason why I have him on the show is because of this paper. Now, there's been a lot of discourse about or perception about the fact that Black men in South Africa are deadbeat fathers, they're absent. I don't think a lot of people know that there is research such as the State of South African Fatherhood, the report which came out in 2021, which Erick is a contributor to, that really looks at what does the research say about this topic. And this is what we want to focus on in our discussion today. So the first thing I want to do is let Erick introduce himself and also take us through why the topic of experiences of Black South African fathers was something of interest for you to research.
Thanks a lot, first of all, Lindile, for the invite. And thank you to everyone who's tuned in. This is a very important topic. And so it's an area of interest to me, just researching masculinities and everything else that has to be, to do with being a man, especially, across Africa, especially kind of African-centered experiences of being man and father. So, and I think it's in line with that I felt like, there was a gap. And when you read a lot of studies that have been done in South Africa around the topic of fatherhood, it focuses a lot on women. And this is, rightfully so, because, the broader narrative has always been that, we've got a high percentage of, single mothers and absent fathers. And so as a result, a lot of the experiences that have been researched have primarily focused on single mothers. And so we wanted to bridge the gap and try and bring in voices of single fathers and specifically Black single fathers, so that they could also be part of the conversation around parenthood in South Africa. What does it look like, especially in post-1994 South African society? So that was one of the many reasons why I felt like, researching Black single fathers was important. So this was part of a much broader study, and I took portions of it and we were able to publish it as a journal article.
Tell me, in how you constructed the study, how did you find the participants for you to be able to do your research from?
So there is a method that we call snowball sampling. So what that basically means is, if I know Lindile to be a single father, I would then reach out to him and say, hey, I'm doing a study and would you be interested in joining? If Lindile said, yes, I am, then I would ask him to say, do you know someone else who is in your position who would be interested in, being a part of a study like this? So that's how we went about recruiting the participants that we interviewed as part of the study.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I just also want to lay the context that we also do have a present father as part of the discussion, and the intention is that it's going to be a dialogue and conversation. So obviously, I'll start off by maybe asking you a couple of questions related to your work and the journal specifically. So please introduce yourself so the audience knows who you are.
My name is Chamsana Hopushe. I am am what I call happily depressed. I am very passionate about mental health, and I am a father. So I saw the invite on Instagram, and I thought this is a great opportunity to contribute to this discussion. So that's why I'm here. Thank you for the invite.
Awesome. You touched on a very good, I suppose, a contentious point that comes up a lot. And I want to quote from the article is it says, South Africa has the second highest rate of father absence in Africa. Findings reported by Vandenberg showed that more than 40% of households in South Africa are run by single mothers, compared to only 3% of those run by single fathers. According to Statistics South Africa, Black Africans are among the most affected, with about 41.90% of reported absent fathers in households. Another study by Hotlines reported that the co-residence data from Statistics South Africa revealed that 36% of children live with their biological mothers in the same household, 34% with both biological parents, and only 2% live with their biological fathers. Now, I know that the paper, as far as I've understood, it doesn't really delve into the underlying reasons why. We know that there's a history of migrant labor and all of this kind of stuff. But I would just be keen to understand from your perspective, why do you think, what are the contributors that have led to the statistics that we've just read?
So I think the one key point or aspect that we're noticing a lot, if you've read the SASOF report, which is the South African State of Fathers report that brings together different researchers and on masculinities to just give an update on where the field is at. So you realize that the one key aspect that has often contributed to a high percentage of, single mother household has been how being present versus absent has been defined. So a lot of the times when we talk about being present, we only look at it from a perspective of physically present. So what has been discovered, and this is kind of where the research is moving towards, it's moving away from this idea that in order for you to be present, the presence has to be physical. And if you're absent, the absence means it's also physical. So what we're seeing the shift towards is understanding that I can be physically absent, maybe because of the nature of the relationship between the mother and the father, but I am involved. So being present means being active, being positive, and being involved. And not so many fathers live in the same household with their children, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not involved. And so when we talk about absent fathers or present fathers, traditionally it used to just be, and I think those statistics are based on that understanding of presence and absence, to say if you are not physically there, then you're an absent father. That's where you see quite a high number of people would fall under that category. But then when you start interviewing fathers, you realize that there's quite a number of fathers. Maybe it could be because of the nature of the separation between the mother and the father. And as a result, mothers don't want anything to do with fathers. And the father feels like, I can't be involved in my child's life because of my relationship with the mother. Or it could also be, cultural factors, especially for men who've had children out of wedlock. Sometimes you need to pay inhlawulo, and so damages. And so as a result, if you don't have the money to pay damages, it becomes a barrier, which is also something that we discovered in the study. When we did the broader study, it was that you haven't paid damages, so you don't have access to the child, and as a result, you might feel like you're absent. And so those are kind of, I think, the three factors. So how we define absence and presence, the cultural element that comes with paying damages, and also the nature of the relationship between the mother and the father.
Okay. I mean, I think this definitely, for me, sheds a different context to the discussion, because if you take it at face value, at least largely from what you would hear from social media, it's almost like there's this collective idea that, you know, black men aren't interested in being involved in being fathers, right?
That's not true,
which,
actually.
which, as you've explained, is not true. Now, the interesting thing is on the involvement piece. I'd like to quote from the article. It says, furthermore, various benefits of fathers' involvement have been reported in the literature. These include improved behavioral, cognitive, and socio-emotional development in children, increased tolerance for stress, less depressive symptoms, and high academic performance, and improved postnatal mental health for the mother. Other benefits include children's increased empathy, self-esteem, and social competence. Involved fathers have also been reported to be healthier than those not involved in raising their children. And maybe here, to ask you, Tamsanga, is, you know, what is your, let me say, journey and experience in your own personal fulfillment as a man and as a father by being involved in your son's life?
Yeah. It's had an impact on my life that is beyond profound. Because of the way in which Kuma was born. I always tell the story. He was born on Father's Day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the day he was born, it was Father's Day. That for me was a gift from God Himself. And the fact that He's a firstborn son. So these things are very powerful factors into me deciding to be an active and present dad. Beyond that, I grew up fatherless. I know the pain of not having a dad to be a sounding board, especially when you reach puberty. So I understand the importance of having a dad in your life. And so having him being born on Father's Day, he's my firstborn, he's a boy. And with my history, it's a no-brainer. I have to be in my son's life. And it's had such a positive impact on me as a man because it's just a fulfilling experience to know that you are there in the development of your son. You know, there's very important milestones that I've been a part of ever since I decided to be there, and I'm proud of it. That pride makes me want to walk with an extra bounce in my step, you know, and it makes me want to contribute more. So I'm actually more ambitious now. I want to do better for myself because who's going to benefit if I do well? It's my son. You see what I mean? So I have to be okay in order for him to be okay. So slowly but surely, my life is gradually improving. Before him, I made a lot of bad mistakes because of not having a dad. There were a lot of things that I missed, a lot of lessons I missed, and I had to learn the hard way through putting your hand on the stove and getting burnt. Like, okay, that's hot, you know. So I had to learn some of these things regarding masculinity the hard way. I don't want to be absent in his life. So that's why I'm saying it's a very fulfilling experience. I'm so fulfilled. I feel happy just being with him. I don't live with him. I have weekends with him. So this is my weekend off. And I had to come here and I'm like, you know what, I'm just going to play. He's my plus one. Yeah. But my experience of fatherhood is that it's helped me become a better man. Yeah.
You touch on something that Erick mentions in his paper. He says, in many cultures, including in South Africa, becoming a father is still perceived to be a rite of passage into manhood. And and so I'm interested to understand from the men that you spoke to in the study and your own experience, do you feel now in the fatherhood journey it's initiated you in being a man? Because typically culturally there's different initiation processes. Right? And how has fatherhood played that initiation process in your journey of manhood?
There has definitely been an element of initiation into some new kind of information. Or I've always had access to the information, but it's a different understanding. of that info. I now understand the importance or the consequences of not organizing your life as a man. Because there's somebody else now who's looking at you, and he's probably going to think being disorganized is the norm. You see what I mean? So I would say there is a definite initiation because I've been gaining access into new knowledge. I'm no longer hanging out with the same people I hang out with because they don't think the way I do now, you know? And they have kids. This is what bothers me. They have children too. Why hasn't the shift clicked yet? You know, is it just me? And I'm seeing that there is a click, but implementation is what holds a lot of men back to actually do the work. You see, but there's no exception. I always say the only way out is through when it comes to manhood. And so, yes, there has been initiation. There's new knowledge that I've been exposed to, but I feel it could have happened a lot sooner had Dad been around. Yeah. So this Kumo being born was a catalyst, but it was too late because usually it's supposed to happen at the start of teenagehood or puberty. That never happened for me. So I guess it was arrested development, if you want to put it that way. Yeah.
On this point, Eric, I'm keen to, based on your research, what are your thoughts around what does the new rite of passage for men look like, particularly if largely the experiences you have a present father that's maybe not living in the same house, right? So before, if you were living in the same house with your dad, he would show you the ones and the twos, then hey, go to the mountain, blah, blah, blah. What does a template of that look like going forward, in your opinion?
Well, I don't think there has been like research done to kind of see the new rite of passage, so to speak. But I think, generally speaking, and having a child is often very much related to masculinity, and this is also based on, studies that have been conducted around how volatile, so to speak, masculinity is. Also, the point being, it's easier to lose, and as men, we often feel like it's easier to lose your masculinity relatively to maybe a femininity. So as a woman, yes, you've got certain cultures where if you don't have children, it almost feels like there's something wrong with you as a female. Yeah. Whereas with men, it's not just a thing of if you don't have children, even though your sexual prowess, I don't know if that, how sexually healthy you are is something that can also bring upon you that sense of I'm not man enough. And so as much as that is an aspect of masculinity, and having a child is almost like proof that I'm man enough, there are also other aspects, And so, and I think as men, we tend to be under so much pressure. If you don't provide, you're not man enough. If you are not present, you're not man enough. If you can't have kids, what would your friends say? Yeah. And I think it's in that context of understanding how easy it is to gain your masculinity and lose it, that we can say there are certain things or certain stages that if you go through, it almost kind of forms as part of a rite of passage. And those things can be cultural and in certain cultures, when you have a child, there might be certain practices that, you will be initiated to as a man to show that now we're in daughter, so those kinds of things. So, and I think it's in that context that we speak of becoming a father as a rite of passage into another dimension of being a man.
You make an interesting point about the provision part, right? Because one of the things that you mentioned in the paper, which I think was a term coined by Cornell, is this thing of hegemonic masculinity, right? Which is basically an ideal
Yes.
state of masculinity. So if you're a man, then you know, provide all these, I would say, typical stereotypes that we have of what it. Now you also expand on the fact that when you're a father, and depending on the circumstance, there's this need to almost have this hybrid masculinity where you're not just the provider, but at least for this weekend, you're also the caregiver.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So how are you seeing from your studies and research how men are grappling with this idea of hybrid masculinity? Because the reality of how we're fathering now is there's going to be instances where you need to tap into what's considered the feminine side by nurturer, provider, carer, and all of that. What has been what you've observed in that tension?
I think there has been a tension, of course, and I think a lot of it comes from, cultural norms around what it means to be a man. And I think what we've seen in South Africa specifically is that because of the history that maybe black men specifically have had of, having your father dislocate to go to, urban areas looking for jobs, and the father never comes back. And as a result, there's this, fatherlessness, one of the factors. So what we see is that, a lot of the times, what it means to be, there are certain norms around, in order for you to be a man, you need to provide. You need to do this, this, and that. And so there's a tension between the more kind of traditional masculine norms and the new ones. And the new ones are informed by the realities of the country we live in. The fact of the matter is, not every man will have a job. Not every man will be financially capable to provide for their children. And it would be unfair for you to say, in order for you to qualify as a man, you need to provide when I can be there for my children in other ways. And so that's where we see almost kind of the tension between the more traditional way of being a man versus the more kind of progressive, to say that I might not be there paying the bills, but I'm happy to be involved in the home, to be there and spend time with my children. And there are, movies. We wrote a paper recently, and on the new man, and how it's portrayed in the media, the Heartlines, which is kind of the Fathers Matters. So they released a series of videos where they also show how that plays out, in how men can also be, nurturers. They can be at home and, nurse the baby, and because the realities of the country are that, sometimes you have the woman who's working and the man is not working. And so that's where you see it's still very much, at the beginning at this stage. And some people will outright tell you, look, a man has to provide.
Yeah.
Now, what happens if I don't? Am I not good enough as a man? And a lot of men end up struggling a lot with their own identity as a man because they don't fit what it means to be a man in the kind of hegemonic sense.
Right.
To say, in order for you to be a man, you have to be a provider, you have to be a protector, you have to be a procreator. If you don't fit this, then you're not a man. You can imagine the damage that does, especially in a country such as South Africa, where the economic factors are at play because of the history and, many other things. Yeah.
On that, tell me, Tamsan, when you found out that you were going to be a father, right? Were there any notions that you had in terms of certain things are only duties and responsibilities that the mother should only do? So things like I'm not changing diapers. I'm not. That's the woman's work and stuff. And if that was the case, how you see things changed and evolved now that the human being is living and breathing and eating? Yeah.
Look, fortunately for me, I had the experience of raising two younger sisters. My mom has two Linombai. So when I was 12, they were 6 months old. So changing nappies, feeding them, bodlisa, you know, letting them sleep, waking them up, washing the children, dressing them properly. I would say I trained with my baby sisters, you see. So that experience, looking back, prepared me in a way for fatherhood unconsciously, because I was someone growing up who actually wanted siblings. My mom tells me this all the time. I actually asked to have a sibling. And when Tuli and Bali came, Bali is adopted, by the way. So I asked for one sibling and I got two. You know? So when Tuli came, I was ready, you know, because I wanted a baby sister. So I just fell into place, you know? And right through their journey, primary school, in Balanda school, you know, fetch them after school, you know what I mean? High school, I would help them out with some memos, you know, and it carries on to this day. They're teenagers, they're 22 now, both of them. So I would say my preparation for fatherhood was contributing in raising my baby sisters. Yeah.
Okay. One of the things that I found interesting, which is probably something that's not widely spoken about, is in the men that you interviewed for this study, right, that are single men, there's some of them who actually got granted custody of their children from court. And I found that to be quite interesting because the default in our thinking is that when there's a relationship breakup, so whether it's a divorce or separation, or you guys are in a relationship, and the default is that the child needs to stay with the mother because that's the primary caregiver. The child is going to be nourished with the mother. Could you maybe expand on potentially what were the motivations for these men to actually want custody of their children?
So, you know, generally speaking, I think all the policies, I think it's the Child Justice Act and the Children's Act, speaks of the guardianship being something that can be shared between either the father and the mother. But because of the cultural norms and ideas around, you know, mothers are the ones that are fit to have custody of the children, it has become hard for fathers to argue or to present a case. In fact, one of the participants in the studies had to fight to prove to the court that I am good enough to also have custody of my children. And so a lot of the fathers were motivated by a number of factors. So number one, they wanted to change the narrative in the same way that, you know, Tammy said, you know, I never had a father and I didn't want to be the father that was just an ATM. Because a lot of the times that's what we see fathers for. If all you are is just to provide financially, and if whether you are good or bad as a father is measured by how much money you can give, then it almost feels like you are an ATM. A lot of them didn't want to be ATMs only. They wanted to be involved in their children's lives. Others, it was because they had lost their partners. And again, the reason why you became a single father also contributed in that some of them, the mother died and they had to step in, and they didn't want to send the children off to the family members. They wanted to be involved in their children's life. And others, it was because maybe the mother was not in a good space, whether it was mentally or otherwise. Maybe there was an addiction involved and you just felt like, I can't leave this responsibility to the mother, so I have to step in and be the present father that and so it was those and there were also maybe other stories where you would see, I grew up with my father and I want to follow in the footsteps. So it was that also was another one of the factors that we found in the study.
So another aspect of fatherhood that you touch on in the paper, and maybe you can also speak to the seeing as you raised your younger siblings, is what it means to parent a boy child versus a girl child,
Okay.
right? So from what I took from the research, when we just even talk about the development of emotional language, right? Typically, boy children, you know, they really don't open up much, right? Whereas girl children typically do. And then when they hit puberty, there's, the challenges of how do I as a father deal with the fact that my daughter's menstruating and all of that kind of stuff. And on this, boy child versus girl child, what were your findings or your observations about how these fathers then tap into a broader support network to help them navigate that?
So with that, so we saw that the parenting style, for one, was slightly different with boys and girls. Parents tended to be more, some participants were more permissive with their girl children, and they were a little bit more authoritarian with their boys. And again, it also depended, but you got a general sense that there's some permissiveness with boys, and I mean with girls, and a bit more firmness, and some of them were based on these ideas of, as a boy you have to be tough, and as a result I need to treat you in a slightly, in a firmer way compared to a girl. And so, and I think in terms of the support structures, one thing that we found actually in terms of the conclusion of the study was that, yes, men are just as capable as women, to raise children, but, children tend to benefit more when there is involvement of both parental figures. And so with men particularly, especially when it came to menstruation, because it's often perceived as taboo in society, and many of them didn't know what to do. Because when you see your girl coming to you and say, Daddy, I'm menstruating, it's like, okay, what do I do now? It's okay. And a lot of them would then draw from either friends who are female, or maybe mothers who, and depending on the relationship, if the father still had some form of contact with the mother, they would reach out and say, hey, your daughter is menstruating, please help here. And so that's how they were able to then, educate themselves around how do you go about this, not only from the people in their own lives, but also, doing research. But there was that discomfort of, okay, my daughter is menstruating, what do I do with that? And it also just reflects a much broader kind of fear that a lot of, men have, in terms of, okay, my daughter is menstruating, this is supposed to be a woman thing. And so if it's a woman thing, as a man, I feel very embarrassed to even talking about it. So it's something that came through in the participants that we interviewed.
And if you were to assess yourself, do you think there's a different, because you, even though they're your siblings, but because of the age gap, you essentially, in their early development, were a form of a father figure. So how you are parenting now versus how you parented your younger siblings, do you think there's a difference by virtue of the fact that they're girls and he's a boy?
Yes, definitely there is a difference, because just growing up, I always treated my baby sisters like glass, because I'm the brother, and I'm the only boy with my mom's kids. There's four of us. Dumi is the firstborn. She's a lady. Then it's me. I'm the only boy. And two of my baby sisters. So I felt a certain responsibility towards them, more than any other situation. And so I was very protective of my baby sisters. Very, very protective. And I was very soft towards them, very caring, very gentle towards them, especially when they were toddlers. But as they grew up, they became more individualized, and Utuli became more of a tomboy. So she became a bit rougher. Not overtly rough, but she was just a bit rougher than the normal girl. Umbali was the soft and dolls with prissy one. So there were some nuances as they grew older, but initially I was very, very soft, very nurturing. Fast forward to now with Kumo, I've learned to have a spectrum, because I've seen a lot of fathers are very authoritative, are very firm. If you push hard enough, it can alienate your son from you, or your child from you, your son, because we're talking about boy children now. And I'm a very observant person, so I told myself when I'm a dad, I need to be a bit more understanding. I've seen those types of fathers, and they have absolutely wonderful relationships with their sons. Even as adult boys, they have absolutely great relationships with their dads, because the fathers were able to measure that, okay, now I'm going to be firm, now I'm going to be cool. An example, a practical example with him, the firmest I've been with Kumo is when I heard his mom tell me, we were still living together. I came from work and she told me that he was at the local Pick and Pay and he stole a pack of Mentos. I don't believe in slapping and hitting your children, but that for me was a moment where I said, he needs to understand that I don't want a child who steals. And took him to the room, 1, 2, 3 shots, told him that I do not want to hear that. If I hear that he's stealing, or he stole something else, I will call the police myself. But I wanted to drive home the point that I do not want my son to steal. I had to be very firm. So I call it having a spectrum. So now my default mode is 50%. Cool. If he does something wrong, 60%, depending on what it is. Some things require full 100%. Some things require full soft. If he's hurt, you can't say marahin wow, how we grew up. Walk it off, you'll be fine. No. Just okay, sorry man, you'll be fine. Sorry, just soothe him a little bit, be a bit more soft. So I've learned to have a spectrum as a father.
On the point about the spectrum of being a father, I think it's still almost an unavoidable reality of where we are about how fatherhood is still largely linked to, first and foremost, you mentioned the ATM thing, right? And I want to just quote from the article. It says, many fathers in this study grew up without fathers. And then it goes on to say, this also seems to confirm findings from other studies on fathers' involvement that many fathers see their role mainly as a financial provider rather than being emotionally available for their children. Participants' emphasis on being financial providers also reflects their complicity in reinforcing hegemonic ideologies of masculinity that position men as sole providers. Participants in this study acknowledge that fathers need to be available emotionally, but all emphasize the role of provision as the key marker of being a good father, further reflecting their commitment to traditional and patriarchal gender role stereotypes about men and fathers. And so for me, the question is, yes, in as much as perhaps if we look at the previous generation, there definitely is a lot more consciousness about being an emotionally available and present father. In the economic situation that we find ourselves in, will we ever escape the inevitable measure of a father primarily being looked at from a provision standpoint? And what would it take for us to unlearn that? And what are your thoughts?
My thoughts, it's gonna take a while, one, for that to happen. Two, individually, I don't have a problem with having the burden of providing for your son be placed on me. As a man, to a certain extent, I believe it should be expected for us to provide. But beyond the expectation, I feel good providing for my son. That's the source of why I provide for my son. I just feel better. I sleep better at night. I work better when I'm at my job. I'm just more calmer, you see? And I also have a history with depression. Making sure that my son is well taken care of is a huge catalyst in me maintaining good spirits. You see? So, yes, it's going to change where society has to understand that men's situations are different individually.
Right.
And we don't all have the same financial muscle. And that shouldn't be a determining factor in having access to your child. You see what I mean? I'm just saying, for me as an individual, I accept it. But I understand that on a societal level, it's something we need to address. Yeah.
Your thoughts on that, Eric?
No, I think in a kind of similar line of thinking, and I think it's important that we 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 strike a balance between, yes, expecting men to be involved, but we also broaden the spectrum in terms of what that involvement looks like. Because if it is purely defined based on financial means, then what we are doing is we are also robbing men of the opportunity to be available and involved in their children's lives.
Correct.
Outside of the finances, because there are other studies that were also conducted where the financial element, in fact, there's a very good book that I would recommend you read. It was written by, I think it's Banner and Swartz, if I'm not mistaken. So it speaks of it's Baba. So they speak about Baba. There are two of them. So there's one that speaks about teenage fathers, and the other one that speaks about fathers in general. And with both, actually, what was discovered was that even though financial provision is the starting point, that's not all there is to being, even with fathers who were able to provide. And what was done in the study was they looked at experiences of children being parented by different types of fathers. And what was discovered from the children's perspective was that, yes, as much as financial provision is good, but children don't actually care whether you provide financially or not. So for them, spending more time was what matters the most.
Yeah.
So is my dad there? And is my dad able to play with me, show up for me, and those kinds of things? And so, there is a need for there to be a balance, especially from, the partner's side, to say, as much as financial provision is important, I also don't want to take away from my partner their ability to be involved in other ways. Because at the end of the day, the children will judge you as a father, not only based on how much money you send, but based on how much time, quality time, you spend with them. So that balance is important.
And
20 more minutes.
Okay.
one thing I wanted to also ask you, Tamsan, was we touched a bit on support structures earlier when Eric was talking about how these men in the study would reach out on the topic of menstruation. What has been your experience so far about the support structures that you have specifically with other men in this journey of fatherhood?
Very difficult. It's been a very lonely journey. I'm not gonna lie, and it's part of the reason I struggle with mental health. It's part of the reason. In 2021, I actually had a depressive episode, and I had to go to hospital. I was having suicidal ideations. I was in the ideation stage. I'd even plotted how I was going to do it. So when you get there, it's dangerous. You need to go to a therapist. So I spent 7 days in the hospital, and that was the catalyst for me to start understanding, male mental health is a real thing. I wasn't even aware at that point that there's male depression, and it's such a huge issue. So for me, struggling with depression started with being fatherless, and that stage of being fatherless, especially as a teenager, I didn't have anyone to speak to because dad is not around. There's my grandfather. He was a great father figure, but there's limits because of age. I couldn't speak to him about certain things.
Right.
The fellas, also there's limitations, because gents have their own things that they're going through. I had to also learn that the hard way because I reached out to a lot of guys and saying, listen, hey man, I'm struggling. And a lot of doors were being closed. A lot of guys were being like, hey, bro, what's wrong? I thought I was being the weird one, but in retrospect, they have their own things to deal with, and they just don't need that right now. I understand that now. But yeah, it was a very, how can I put it? I had a lot, it was a big learning curve for me because there were no men. And I guess I'm lucky because we live in the age of tech. So Google, a lot more Google searches on masculinity, and then you start getting into a rabbit hole, and you find all these weird channels, YouTube channels, pages, people who talk about masculinity,
alpha males and all of that stuff. The manosphere.
The red pill community. I was exposed to all of that for a few years, but I like my personality because I don't like to commit to any movement without knowing everything about it. So there's certain flaws in the manosphere or red pill movement, but there's some core issues or core teachings that I understood, like, oh, okay, that's something to pull from. And then, so I'm slowly gaining an understanding of what masculinity is from other men using social media and technology. As far as in real life, I do not meet guys who want to open up and talk. It's quite a struggle, but I understand because they have their own mental health or their own struggles to deal with. Men have a lot of struggles. I'm sure as a therapist, they have a lot of struggles that if they could talk and tell us, like, yo, I'm right. I don't have problems. So that's been my experience, and I would definitely say I've learned to navigate the road alone.
And same question to you, Eric. What have been your observations, not only through the study, but through the work that you do around this topic of support structures by men in this journey of fatherhood?
I think, because of the pressure that men often find themselves under, and again, it's again feeds into this hegemonic masculinity of, as a man, you have to be strong. And so what we mean by strong is you don't have to be vulnerable. And so as a result, a lot of people are raised in a way where that is very much reinforced. You don't have to show emotions, and anything that has to do with vulnerability is punished. And we see it everywhere in the media and movies we watch and all of these things. And so I can only imagine when you find yourself in that space where you're going through stuff and you're like, okay, but no one can relate. It's not maybe not that no one can relate. It's just, but people suffer in silence. As men, you're like, okay, I might be going through depression. I might be going through anxiety. I might be going through a whole lot of things, but I can't talk about it because society has created this thing of, as a man, if you show your vulnerability, you are weak. And what does that mean? And so what you then see, especially in terms of trends of suicide specifically, in South Africa and even globally, there is a high percentage of suicide amongst men and boys compared to women. And the reason being, women are quite relatively, emotionally, they're in touch with their emotions. And as a result, I might have a group of friends, we can cry about it and we can talk about it and that's it. Whereas with men, oftentimes you are on your own. And so with women, when they try and attempt suicide, for example, they might not go for the extreme measures that would lead to them dying. Whereas with men, if I want to commit suicide, I'm not going to go and just drink pills. I might shoot myself. So they go for the more extreme ways of doing it. And as a result, it's more successful than when it comes to women. And as a result, you have a high percentage of suicide amongst men compared to women. And so in terms of support, the kind of work that we're trying to do is to be able to normalize seeking help, to advocate for more alternative ways of being a man. So I can be a strong man, whatever that means, but I can also be vulnerable. I can reach out for help if need be. I can talk to my friend about me being stressed and me going. It doesn't necessarily mean I'm weak. It just means I'm human. Because as a human being, we go through different ranges of emotions. And to have that space that is safe to be able to talk about it doesn't necessarily mean you're weak. It just reaffirms the fact that you're human. And so, and that's where we're trying to create that space, whether it's through therapy with the boys at the school to say, hey, you can be athletic, you can be, but you can also come to therapy if you feel like, you're really going through a tough time. So you can do both, basically.
Okay. I would like to read a few passages from the conclusion of the paper. So, from this study, it can be concluded that contrary to the dominant narrative about fathers in South Africa, especially black fathers, not all fathers are absent. These findings reflect participants' attempts to move away from traditional and patriarchal ideologies about masculinity and fatherhood that only position men as financial providers. These results support findings from other studies establishing that despite progressive gender and family policies and legislation adopted by the South African government, traditional and patriarchal ideologies about gender roles are still prevalent in South Africa. And to add to that point, there was one thing that I wanted to highlight about the point about the traditional roles, which are so prevalent, if I can find it. But to paraphrase, what it was talking about was the issue of maintenance. And it was basically saying that our default is thinking when it comes to maintenance that it's only women that need money, right? That there's actually circumstances where it's actually the father figure who maybe his business has gone through a slump or he's unemployed or whatever the case may be. He's the one that's also in need of some kind of financial assistance. And it's those kinds of, I suppose, stereotypes and norms that we need to break and openly talk about from a fatherhood perspective. So in closing, I would like to ask if you were to, it's a question to Tamzang, if you were to imagine what a new state of fatherhood should look like when your son is a father, what would that look like potentially?
I'm glad you asked because I'm busy defining it as we speak in my life, right? But I grew up without my dad, so andizazi iziduko zasekhaya. I don't know my side, my father's side, basically. So naturally, having a son has raised that question that, okay, tell me, who are you? As a man, as an African man, I don't know who I am. I don't even think I'm a man in my culture. So I've started the journey of redefining for me what it means to be a man in 2024 in Zanzibar. So I'm started the process of getting back to my roots. So I'm trying to connect with other Hupushes because my immediate line, they're not there. I don't know them. So I'm going to ask other people, who are the Hupushes? What do we do? You understand? Just to gain an understanding of what's done in my clan. And then move forward to actually do or go through the rites of passage that I was supposed to go through. Things that my dad should have done for me, I'm in a position to do them for myself. Because I need to do this for him. He needs to go through a rite of passage eventually. I want him to go to the mountain, but for that to happen, I need to finish that. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So this is my redefinition of manhood in Mzansi in 2024. Is incorporating the cultural aspect of who I am with the future forward thinking of be a bit more, have a spectrum. You see what I mean? Yes. I want to have the roots, but I call it firm beliefs held loosely. You see, have firm beliefs, but be willing to change and be malleable. So that's my redefinition. I have firm beliefs about what it means to be a man, but I'm willing to take new information. So I need to get to the root of who I am so that he can know who he is. But it's 2024. I get that. So that's my redefinition.
Erick, you touched on a paper that's being worked on, and you made mention of this term, a new man. Could you, in the closing few minutes, as you've been doing the work, when you cast your eyes to what does this new man look like, how would you describe this new man?
And I think the new man, first of all, has to be conceptualized within kind of the African context, because what we saw a lot happening was that a lot of how men were defined was very much borrowing from kind of Western ideas of what it means to be a man. So we need to center, the identities of men within the African context. And in doing that, we also have to highlight the importance of things like culture and spirituality, because when you talk about identity is not just something you do. It's something, especially in that more kind of African context, there is a connection between, the living and the spiritual dimension, whether that is from a kind of religious point of view or kind of a cultural point of view. So that is number one. Number two, what we've also found to be more important is the fact that men have to be present, they have to be active, and they have to be positive. So, and what that might look like for each person will differ. But I think those are key aspects to maybe, expand on and, keep in mind as we navigate, what it means to be a man and what it means to be a father in the modern world.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Your commitment to the young black boy who'll grow to be a strong black man.
Yes.
And with that, I will let Kumo sign us out.
And thank you for inviting me and trusting me to be a part of this conversation. I really appreciate it.
So,
Yes, Kumo, over to you.
Over to you.
goodbye, everybody. We'll see you in the next video.
Sure.